Hi, this is Matt Wolpe from Laney Carpentry. Today we're going to go over an introduction to tools and tool safety. Some of these are going to be the fundamental hand tools that you use every day. Some of these are more specialty power tools that you use sometimes. But our goal in this program is to empower you, and hopefully you feel confident using all these tools and knowing their best application. We're going to start with PPE, which stands for personal protective equipment. The most important, they're all important, but the most important fundamental uh, uh, PPE component is eye protection. So we're going to require that you wear eye protection at all times that you're using a tool, whether that be a hand tool or power tool. When I was starting out, I was told that the eyeball is so sensitive. It's almost like thinking of it like a container of cream cheese. Anything that comes into contact with it will just kind of get stuck. It's kind of a gross analogy, but um, it stuck with me for many years. So we require that you provide your own and have eye protection on hand. And it's nice to have your own set. We do have some if you really need it in an emergency. We have some to loan, but it's nice to have your own because for one thing, you can keep them from getting scratched and just find the pair that um, feels best on you. Second part of PPE is ear protection. You're always going to have ear protection on you, ready to put on. And this could look like the one on the left, which is kind of a neck band, and it always hangs out around your neck, and you can put it on and off at your will. I like this kind, and this is what I would recommend. But really, any kind of ear protection is important. On the right is more of a earmuff style, very effective, really good for constant droning machines. It's better at blocking out sounds. As a job site carpenter, though, I think the one on the left is the most versatile. There's also very small ones that you can bundle up and stick in your ear, and they expand, and those are perfectly fine. They tend to be more disposable and easily lost. That's the only reason I would hesitate to recommend those. But ear protection is important not only because it protects your hearing for the long term, but also just keeping the stress level down. It can be stressful working around loud power tools. So, what I like to do is really keep things as calm as possible. And I find that wearing ear protection whenever I'm not talking to someone is really the most important thing for just keeping me calm and keeping folks from being on edge. Thirdly, we're going to use hard hats. Whenever we're outside of the classroom working on a site, we're going to use a hard hat. So that protects us from things falling on our head, which could be the most severe injury of all. Um, and yeah, so everyone is encouraged and required to have their own hard hat. It's nice at the beginning of the semester if you write your name on a piece of tape and stick it on there, so we get to know each other's names easily. Another piece of PPE that's important is the dust mask. In this case, this is a 3M N95 dust mask. We use this in carpentry when we're doing tasks that kick up a lot of dust. So you're welcome to use it anytime you use a power tool, as well as sanding, in particular sanding and working with drywall. So whenever we come into contact with fine particulate matter, I will make an announcement in class that this is a good time to put on your dust mask. This is another thing that you have of your own and you don't really share it. And mostly because that's a way to transfer a cold or something. And then this coming semester, fall 2020, we're going to be paying particular attention to masks, and we're going to be actually be wearing masks at all time due to the COVID-19 protocol. There's different kinds of dust masks. The ones on the left are, I'm seeing more of these nowadays. They have a filter in them, and they're a little more comfortable to wear. The one on the right is the most protective kind that you can have. They have cartridge filters and really seal between the mask and your face to create a really airtight filter. Another thing is gloves, work gloves. And work gloves are a little bit complicated just in the sense that they're really for handling materials and moving things, not so much using tools. So we actually don't want to use work gloves when we're using any kind of power tool that has a spinning blade or spinning part. And the reason for that is the gloves can actually get caught in that rotating blade and can pull your hand in. So we're going to be strategic about when we use gloves and when we don't. Work boots, another fundamental part of a carpenter's attire. There's lots of different kinds. You can get expensive ones, you can get non-expensive ones. And for our program, you're not required to wear steel toe, but we do want you to wear something that is extra protective. So in this case, this is a leather boot. But we do encourage steel toe if you have access and are able to get them. But a work boot is important, not to work in a sneaker or especially a sandal. Next thing we're going to go over is some marking and measuring tools. This is something we're going to go over in the first couple weeks of class, and this is a habit that I want people to create or cultivate and use for their whole building career. Because if you have good measuring and marking skills, it's going to save you big time as far as mistakes and frustration down the road. So one thing to know is tolerance. A good carpenter is usually within about a 16th inch tolerance, which means that if you measure a wall, and this is a drawing of a stud wall, and you measure the diagonal both directions, then the difference should be no greater than 1/16 of an inch. Some people say an eighth of an inch, and that's okay, but definitely not more than an eighth. So marking and measuring is important in order to cut pieces so that when you assemble it, you have accurate results that are 16th inch tolerance, within the 16th inch tolerance. So starting off, we're going to use a carpenter's pencil. Carpenter's pencils are different than a regular pencil. For one thing, they're just a little more robust. They don't break as easily, especially the lead tip. They're kind of funny looking. They're kind of wide. And the reason for that is if you set them down on a sloped incline, let's say a roof, they won't roll away, for instance. They're also a uniform size, so you can use them as a spacer if you need to. The way you sharpen them is with a utility knife, and I will demonstrate that in class, but keeping your pencil sharp is extremely important. So when you, in order to build within a 16th inch of square tolerance, part of that is marking lines that aren't too thick. The thickness of a line can actually cause inaccuracy. So keeping your pencil sharp and keeping your line as thin as possible is important for getting that tolerance. Next thing is a tape measure. Typically we use the 25-foot tape measure in class, so the one on the left. The 16-foot is nice to have if you have both, and it's not quite as heavy. But if you choose one, just have the 25-footer. And a good tape measure is important. Tape measures can break, and there's worse quality tape measures out there. One thing I look at is the tab at the end. You can see the tab is riveted on to the rule. And there should be movement in that tab. And that's what those rivets are for. The movement accounts for the thickness of the tab itself so that you'll get the same measurement when you're pushing against something as when you're pulling against it. So if you want to make sure that that tab moves just a little bit, should be about a 1/16 of an inch, and isn't twisted or stuck or broken. The other thing you want to look at is the lines on the tape measure. And I like a less cluttered tape measure without numbers. I also don't like when there's metric on one side, but that's really up to you. It's a personal decision, however you like the marks laid out. But what is important is learning how to read a tape measure. So again, building within a 1/16 inch of square is our goal. And to do that, you need to be able to mark to the 1/16 of an inch. And so when you're first starting out, you're going to have to spend some time with your tape measure getting to know what each little line means. And this is a good tape measure. I like it because on the one side, it does have numbers. On the other side, it doesn't. So it's less cluttered. And so if you can see, every little tick mark between the inch lines is a 1/16 of an inch. So we know that. Knowing that, every other tick mark is an 1/8 of an inch. And so you're going to want to get fluent in reading the tape measure and determining what each tick mark is. And there is some math involved. I don't think it's too much math, but we're here to help you with it. Utility knife. Always have a utility knife on you. You use this for sharpening a pencil, for cutting things open, cutting drywall, all kinds of things. So I always recommend having one with a retractable blade. That way it's safer and the blade doesn't just stay out. You can always retract it. But that's a fundamental carpentry hand tool. Speed square. We're going to go deeper into what a speed square does in class, but speed square is a required fundamental tool, and it does so many things and is really kind of a magical tool, and I hope you get to appreciate its magic. But it's really our go-to layout tool, and we'll talk more in depth about that. But you should have a speed square. They come in metal or plastic. I always say if you have a choice, try to get metal instead of plastic, but for our purposes, either one is fine. This is a video. We're going to go into that later about how to use a speed square. This is a combination square, which is does some different things than the speed square. Most notably, it's adjustable. However, if you are choosing between a speed square and a combination square, for our class, you're going to want a a speed square. A speed square is fundamental. Combination square would be a nice addition. And there are times we're going to use this in class, but you don't need one necessarily for class. But I do want you to know that they exist, and it's best to demo in person what this does, especially for the adjustable sliding feature. Angle bevel. Angle bevel is a cool tool. You're not required to have one for class, but now we're getting into tools that you should just know about, know that they're out there, and know that you could use them in the future. So angle bevel has a pivoting steel rule, and the nice thing is you can set it at any angle. So you can basically move the steel rule so that it mirrors an angle in real life, and then take that angle up to a saw, for instance, and line the saw up to that angle. So it's a way of taking measurements, taking angles, measurements without actually doing much math, just kind of scribing in place what that angle is. So it's a cool tool. Chalk line. Chalk line is an essential marking tool, and everyone is encouraged to have one. We will use chalk line to lay out, for instance, where we're going to put nails or screws. And the nice thing about a chalk line, it's a way of marking that's not permanent. So you can make a nice straight line. There's basically chalk that fills up this vessel that a string is embedded in, and the chalk goes away after a little while. Okay, hammer. So hammer, there's different kinds of hammers. This is a framing hammer. There's also a finish hammer. If you have to choose one for our class, then you're going to want a framing hammer. Framing hammers are longer and typically have a longer handle and are bigger, a little heavier, and are meant to deliver more power with each blow. This is a premium framing hammer called a stiletto. And oftentimes framing hammers have a little waffled head. It's textured so that it grips the nail better. This is preferred. However, you don't use it when you're doing finish work on the inside of a house because you don't want to leave those waffle mark impressions. So use a framing hammer when you're framing a house and nailing together components that are not seen in the finished version of the house. A finish hammer is what you use when you are further along in construction and are actually going to see the things that you're hammering. Cat's paw is essential for taking out nails. So you sometimes you have to dig a nail out and use leverage. Use the leverage of a cat's paw. We'll demo that in class. Another really useful tool that's suggested is a 4-in-1 screwdriver. This is a screwdriver with different tips that can be inserted into it. And they're the basic tips that you need out in the field. So Phillips head, flat, and a flathead. And there's other kinds as well. But having one of these is super handy. And it's nice not to have different screwdriver bodies, but just to have different tips. Chisels. There's lots of different kinds of chisels. And as a framing carpenter, you don't need really nice chisels like the ones on the right. The ones on the left are perfectly fine. And chisel is something you use to clean up maybe a rough cut. There's lots of different applications for a chisel, and I hope you get to know the beauty of chisels. And also sharpening a chisel. You can have any kind of basic chisel and keep it sharp. You don't need a really fancy set unless you're a high-end furniture maker. So for us, we're just going with the ones on the left. Handsaw, there's different kinds of handsaws. This is a Western handsaw, which means that it cuts on the push stroke. There's also a Japanese handsaw that cuts on the pull stroke. If I had to choose one, I would choose the pull saw. I just find it much more ergonomic and accurate, but there's advantages and disadvantages to both. You will get a sense of using both and some of the technique that's involved with using a handsaw. Okay, we're going to get into power tools now. This is just really for you to put a word to what these tools are and to build up your vocabulary. This is a jigsaw. A jigsaw is a handheld power tool with a reciprocating blade, and that blade moves up and down. And the nice thing about the jigsaw is you can cut freehand. You can just cut shapes, irregular shapes, curves, circles, whatever. Basically, you just drive that blade through your material. So a jigsaw is handy, particularly for making curved cuts. Circular saw. Circular saw is the kind of fundamental handheld power tool of a carpenter. This is a sidewinder circ saw, so it's smaller than another kind, which I'll show you. And you can do a ton of things with the circular saw. So we're going to start off with that and try and get you comfortable with the circ saw. But a sidewinder, again, is a lightweight circular saw. There's also the worm drive circular saw, which is heavier. However, it does deliver, I think, a straighter cut overall. One thing it does is it kind of doesn't jump right when you start it. And there's a difference. They basically have a different motor, and the motor is on a different side of the blade. So there's a different feel to a sidewinder or a worm drive circ saw, but most importantly, just finding whatever feels most comfortable for you. Both of them are good, and yeah, we just want you to be comfortable using one or the other, and hopefully both. Sawzall. Sawzall is exactly what it sounds like. It saws everything. Saws all. This is used for pretty rough work, in particular demolition. It can saw through metal, wood, many different kinds of materials. And for taking something apart, it's quite handy. We don't use it too much for precision work, but there definitely are times where a Sawzall is the right tool for the job. Angle grinder, we don't use this too much in class, but just to know what it is it's an abrasive tool, and it's typically meant for cutting or grinding metal. So let's say there's a nail sticking out that you just can't get out. You could just grind it off. It'll cut through it pretty quickly and easily. We also use it for cutting sheet metal, and also for grinding down burrs that might be in any kind of that might be remaining after a piece of metal is cut. Routers are pretty magical tools. I personally love the router, and there's different kinds of routers, but just the basic overview of a router is there's a spinning bit that goes into this a collet, and the motor spins that bit, and there's all different kinds of bits, and basically that bit subtracts from the wood, so it's a subtractive tool. And you can do tons of different things with a router, but mainly it's a way of removing material, removing wood in a very precise way, to different depths and widths, so that other things can fit into that slot. Miter saw is another fundamental carpentry tool that everyone will get experience with. This is a sliding miter saw, which means that it can cut boards that are up to 12 inches wide. The blade mechanism actually slides. And the nice thing about the miter saw is you can adjust it to pretty much any angle between 0 and 45 degrees. So and there's an easy way to know what angle you're cutting. So miter saw is fundamental, and particularly for angled cuts, trim, but you can use it for all kinds of things. Okay, cordless drill. Cordless drill we're going to use pretty much every class, and we use actually a drill and an impact driver. So these are two tools. So I'm going to toggle back and forth between these that are kind of siblings to one another, and we use both of them. We use them for different things. The cordless drill is really for drilling holes. The impact driver is for driving screws. And the nice thing about the impact driver is that as it spins, it makes a hammering motion. So what that means is that it takes less pressure from your wrist to push that screw in, and does some of that pushing for you, so that it takes less of a toll on your wrist. It's also lighter weight. So when you're putting screws in all day long, you want to have an impact driver as opposed to a drill. Okay, table saw. So table saw is kind of the workhorse of a wood shop. There are also portable table saws for using on a construction site. And I do want people to be familiar and comfortable with the table saw. This is a particular kind of table saw called the SawStop. And the short version of the long story is that SawStop senses conductivity. And when the blade makes contact with your finger, for instance, instead of cutting off your finger, there's a break that shoots into the blade and absorbs that blow. So instead of losing a finger, you'll get a little band-aid size scratch cut, and you'll be able to bandage it up, no problem, and instead of having to go to the emergency room. So we only use SawStop in class, and we'll go over all the nuances and protocols with using a SawStop. But the main thing to know is not to assume that it's going to work and not to trigger it on purpose. It does cost money to replace that cartridge in the blade, but who knows? Ours could be the one that came off the factory line with a defect. So we don't want to count on that technology, but it is a great innovation. This is a video we will go through another time about it. The person who developed the technology uses a hot dog to demonstrate it, and you can see it just left that size of an impression on the hot dog before the blade completely stopped. So that's the end of this slideshow. I really just want you to get familiar with the basic tools that we'll be using, and also build out your tool set that you'll be using throughout this whole semester. And these are tools that hopefully you hold on to and care for a long time.